What if the man you passed on the street every day, the one no one ever noticed, was once a hero who saved countless lives? Walter Grady, a 66-year-old homeless vet, was a forgotten man, until one day a simple loaf of bread in a Brooklyn market would unravel a story of valor, sacrifice, and the broken promises of a system that failed him. As his past comes to light in a courtroom, the world begins to realize the truth. Some heroes never ask to be remembered. Stay tuned to discover how one man's life went from invisible to unforgettable. Can you imagine a man like Walter Grady, 66 years old? A shadow in the Brooklyn streets, his thin frame weathered by time, his silver beard wild and ungroomed for years. He was a fixture in the neighborhood, a quiet ghost hauling an old military-style backpack, its faded green canvas and frayed straps screaming of a past life in the U.S. Army. Why did the locals call him the Quiet One? Because unlike others who begged or stirred trouble, Walter kept to himself, scavenging bottles for recycling or humbly accepting scraps from kind-hearted restaurant workers. Each night he'd shuffle to a different doorway, careful not to burden any single shop owner. Who could guess the weight of his story? What almost no one knew, can you believe it, was that Walter had served over 20 years in the Army, honorably discharged in 2004, but tragedy struck hard when his beloved wife, Margaret, succumbed to cancer in 2008, misdiagnosed by the VA hospital. Oh, how that broke him. Spiraling into depression, Walter pushed away family, sold their modest apartment, and poured every penny into Margaret's favorite charity. Then, poof, he vanished into New York's anonymous streets. Sometimes it's easier to be nobody than somebody who failed the person they love most, he whispered once to a soup kitchen volunteer. Can you feel the ache in those words? On a brutally cold November afternoon, with snow looming and the air biting below freezing, Walter slipped into Morelli's corner market. 3 days without food. Can you imagine the hunger gnawing at him? His hands shook as he tucked a day-old loaf of bread into his tattered coat, while Miss Morelli helped another customer. But wait, Morelli had new security mirrors. Hey, stop right there, he bellowed, grabbing the phone. I'm calling the cops. Walter didn't bolt. No, he just stood there, the bread peeking out of his half-zipped jacket. I just needed strength to live one more day, he murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. How could anyone not feel for him? Within minutes, 2 patrol officers arrived. The younger one, Officer Jenkins, looked uneasy as he cuffed Walter's frail wrists. You really have, he asked, spotting the worn dog tag chain around Walter's neck. This ID's barely legible. Walter nodded, his eyes distant. I used to be someone useful. Not anymore. Jenkins' voice softened, but duty called. Gotta take you in, sir, he said almost regretfully. Store owner's pressing charges. Says you've shoplifted before. Can you picture the shame Walter carried as those cuffs clicked? At the precinct, they processed Walter like any petty thief. A public defender breezed through, more interested in clearing cases than digging into Walter's life. Assigned a court date for the next morning, Walter faced a preliminary hearing to formalize the charges. When dawn broke, he was led into Brooklyn's municipal courtroom, still in yesterday's wrinkled clothes, stiff from a night in holding. No family waited dead him. No witnesses stood in his corner, just a handful of lawyers, reporters chasing bigger stories, and court staff trudging through their routines. How lonely must that have felt? Case number 47-2093. State versus Walter Grady. The clerk droned. The young prosecutor, adjusting his tie, stood tall. Your Honor, the defendant stole a loaf of bread from the local market. Given his prior petty thefts and lack of fixed address, we recommend detention until trial. Judge Michael Carmichael, a stern figure known for quick, no-nonsense rulings, barely glanced up from the case file. The courtroom had already written Walter off, another homeless man caught in the system's churn. But then everything changed. Mr. Grady, how do you plead? Judge Carmichael asked, finally meeting Walter's gaze. Guilty, Your Honor, Walter replied softly. I was hungry. A snicker rippled from the back row. How cruel. The judge's glare silenced it, but as he scanned the paperwork, his voice faltered. Walter Edward Grady, former staff sergeant, United States Army. His words hung in the air. The courtroom stilled. The judge's face shifted, his knuckles whitening as he gripped the bench. He stared at Walter, then the file, then Walter again. What was happening? Without a word, Judge Carmichael stood abruptly. The room froze. Judges don't just stand in routine hearings. For agonizing seconds, he said nothing, his face a mask of restrained emotion. Your Honor, the prosecutor stammered, baffled by the breach in protocol. Court will take a 15-minute recess, Carmichael declared, his voice rough with something unspoken. The defendant will remain. As he strode to his chambers, whispers erupted. Walter sat motionless, eyes glued to the floor, seemingly oblivious to the storm his name had unleashed. What secret had sparked this? In his chambers, Judge Carmichael's hands trembled as he pulled a worn photo from his desk drawer. A snapshot of military personnel in desert fatigues outside an Iraqi medical tent. There he was, 20 years younger, a field medic before he turned to law. And there, towering in the back row, was Walter Grady. Heart pounding, the judge accessed a military database from his veteran affairs work. Walter's record flashed on screen, confirming his suspicions. Oh, the weight of that truth. Staff Sergeant Walter Grady had served 3 grueling tours, 2 in Iraq, 1 in Afghanistan, managing logistics to supply forward bases in the deadliest time. He'd earned the Bronze Star for valor in 2003, driving a burning supply truck away from wounded soldiers during an ambush, saving 17 lives despite his own injuries. A New York Times photo captured him carrying an injured Afghan child to a medical helicopter, a fleeting symbol of compassion in war. But the real bombshell, a newly declassified report from July 2003, revealed Walter had carried a wounded medic, Private First Class Michael Carmichael, 2 miles to safety, under enemy fire, shrapnel tearing into his own body. My God, the judge whispered, it's him. For years, Carmichael had searched for the man who saved his life, knowing only the name Grady, shouted amid battle's chaos. Could this be real? While the judge grappled with this revelation, Walter sat alone in the courtroom, ignored by a bailiff scrolling on his phone. For 15 years, Walter had been invisible, a ghost on society's edges. After Margaret's death, grief and untreated PTSD consumed him. The VA's misdiagnosis of her cancer shattered his trust. When she passed, he abandoned everything: benefits, pension, identity, unable to face the system that failed her. Can you fathom that kind of loss? Locals saw him as a nuisance. Teenagers mocked him, tossing food for laughs. Shop owners hosed down sidewalks where he slept. Police shooed him when residents griped. Even other homeless folks steered clear of the quiet man who woke screaming from nightmares. Walter scraped by, collecting bottles and cans to buy cough syrup when winter chilled his lungs. He never begged, his military grit keeping him stubbornly self-reliant, even as life crumbled. On his darkest days, he'd pull out Margaret's photo, wrapped in plastic to shield it from rain. Almost there, Maggie, he'd whisper, just holding on a little longer. Oh, how that must have hurt. In his chambers, Judge Carmichael sprang into action, making frantic calls, first to the VA to verify Walter's record, then to Colonel James Mason, who'd served with them both. Mason, it's Carmichael, he exclaimed. I found him, the man who saved me at Fallujah. He's in my courtroom, homeless, charged with stealing bread. Mason's stunned silence spoke volumes. I'm 3 hours away, he finally said. Don't let him leave. The judge scribbled a note on official letterhead. Walter Grady is no ordinary homeless man. He's a symbol of loyalty, forgotten by the nation he served. Ethics barred him from dismissing the case outright, but he'd ensure justice took a new path. How could he not? As the recess wound down, the judge's clerk found a document on her desk, the iconic photo of Walter with the Afghan child, paired with a note in Colonel Mason's handwriting. Some heroes never ask to be remembered. The pieces clicked. Walter wasn't just a defendant. His actions had touched lives, including those now shaping his fate. When court resumed, Walter sensed the shift. The judge's cold detachment was gone, replaced by, what was it? Respect, recognition. Before Walter could process it, the proceedings veered. In light of new information about the defendant's background, this court postpones further proceedings pending investigation, Carmichael declared. The defendant remains in custody until tomorrow's hearing. The prosecutor, baffled, didn't object. Walter, used to systems dictating his life, just nodded. As he was led away, the judge added, "Ensure Mr. Grady gets a proper meal and medical care." Why the sudden kick? That night, a local blog posted a snarky headline: "Homeless man claims military hero status. Judge delays sentencing for bread thief." Cynical comments flooded in. "Another bum faking vet stories. If he served, why's he stealing instead of using VA benefit?" In the county jail, a young inmate, enraged by the article on a smuggled phone, confronted Walter. "Stolen valor's disgusting old man," he snarled, shoving him against a wall. "My brother died in Afghanistan while frauds like you milk sympathy." Walter didn't resist, absorbing the blow as he had society's scorn for years. That night, he skipped the meal, clutching his dog tags and Margaret's photo, wondering why after so long someone had truly seen him. Could hope still exist? Can you believe the scene that unfolded the next morning as Walter Grady, weary and unaware, was led back into the Brooklyn courtroom? Something extraordinary was brewing. Could you feel it? Unlike the previous day's nearly empty gallery, every seat was packed, buzzing with anticipation. News cameras lurked outside, barred from entering, but poised to capture the drama about to unfold. Walter's confusion deepened. Why all this attention? His heart must have skipped a beat when he noticed his overworked public defender had been replaced by a distinguished older attorney, Richard Harlow, from the Veterans Legal Defense Alliance. "Someone's taken an interest in your case, Mr. Great," Harlow said with a knowing glint, offering no further hints. Who could it be? As Walter settled at the defense table, the courtroom doors swung open. The audience rose for Judge Michael Carmichael, but Walter's eyes were drawn to three military officers, striding in behind the court officers, their full-dress uniforms gleaming with authority. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Michael Carmichael," the bailiff boomed. The proceedings kicked off with an unusual formality. Did you catch that? The judge's demeanor was worlds apart from the day before, his stern facade softened by something profound. "Before we address the charges against Mr. Grady," he announced, "the court will hear testimony about the defendant's background, which may influence these proceedings." Testimony? What could change this seemingly open and shut case? Walter's brow furrowed in confusion as Colonel James Mason took the witness stand. 20 years older than when they'd last met, Mason's military bearing was still unmistakable. Can you picture the pride in his stance? Sworn in, he spoke with razor-sharp precision. "I am Colonel James Mason, stationed at Fort Hamilton. I've known the defendant, Staff Sergeant Walter Grady, since our deployment to Iraq and He turned to face Walter directly. Oh, the weight of that moment. This man before you saved 17 soldiers' lives during an ambush near Fallujah. Under heavy fire, he drove a burning fuel truck away from our position, suffering second-degree burns, but preventing an explosion that would have wiped us out. Can you imagine the courage it took?" Murmurs rippled through the courtroom as Mason pressed on. Staff Sergeant Grady later carried a wounded medic, Private First Class Michael Carmichael, 2 miles to safety, despite shrapnel tearing into his own leg. Gasps filled the air as all eyes swung to Judge Carmichael, whose composed mask cracked, a nod confirming the astonishing truth. The prosecutor stood visibly uneasy. "Your Honor, while this speaks to the defendant's past character, it doesn't erase the theft," he argued, his voice wavering. But Mason wasn't done. "Oh no, if I may continue," he interjected firmly, "we've uncovered a grave error. Due to a 2008 system migration, Walter Grady's pension and benefits were wrongly terminated when he didn't respond to paperwork sent to an old address. He's been owed $1,317 a month for 15 years, plus medical care for service-related injuries over 20. Can you fathom the injustice?" The courtroom fell silent, the weight of Mason's words sinking in. Walter himself looked stunned, his weathered hands clutching the table's edge as if to anchor him. "Furthermore," Mason added, producing a folder with a flourish, "we have affidavits from 5 members of your old unit, all vouching for your character, including a letter from General Richards, who credits you with saving his son in that same ambush." The gallery buzzed. Could this really be happening? Judge Carmichael's voice cut through, addressing Walter directly for the first time. "Mr. Grady, please approach the bench." As Walter rose, uncertain and frail, The judge's tone softened. Protocol would typically bar me from presiding over a case with a personal connection, but I didn't recognize you yesterday. Only after reviewing your file did I realize you were the man who saved my life in Iraq. A collective gasp swept the room. Did you feel the shock? The judge removed his glasses, his formal air melting away. For nearly 2 decades, I've searched for you to say thank you. I only knew Grady, shouted across the battlefield. Walter's voice, rough from years of silence, finally broke through. I was just doing my job, sir, he rasped. You did far more than your job, Carmichael countered, his voice thick with emotion. And this country has failed you. Can you imagine the weight of those words? Turning to the prosecutor, the judge pressed, given these extraordinary circumstances, does the state wish to proceed with charges? The young prosecutor, now visibly moved, stood. Your Honor, the state moves to dismiss all charges against Mr. Grady, with prejudice, he declared. So ordered, Carmichael responded instantly. Mr. Grady, you are free to go. This court extends its deepest apologies for the miscarriage of justice that has stretched far beyond these walls. Free, after all this time. As Walter stood, frozen in disbelief, the courtroom doors creaked open again. A woman in her 30s stepped in, her eyes scanning until they locked on Walter. Tears streamed down her face as she approached. Uncle Walter, she cried, I'm Rebecca, Margaret's niece. We've been searching for you for years. Walter's stoic facade crumbled. Oh, the heartbreak. His shoulders sagged as Rebecca enveloped him in a hug. The first warm human touch he'd felt in years that wasn't the cold grip of handcuffs. Can you picture the tears in that embrace? Outside, reporters swarmed Colonel Mason, microphones thrusting forward. This isn't just about one veteran, he declared, his voice resolute. It's about thousands of Walter Grady's who slipped through the cracks of the system they defended. Today, we start making it right. By afternoon, the story exploded online. Can you believe how fast it spread? News helicopters buzzed above the courthouse as Walter emerged, clean-shaven in donated clothes, flanked by Mason and Judge Carmichael, now recused but standing by as a private citizen. The crowd parted as Mr. Morelli, the store owner who'd pressed charges, pushed through. I didn't know, he stammered, his face ashen. I thought you were just another troublemaker. I'm so ashamed. Walter, overwhelmed, could only nod. How could he process it all? Within 48 hours, a veterans organization launched a fund for Walter that soared past $200,000 in donations. Social media lit up with stories of other veterans lost in bureaucratic mazes, prompting the VA to announce a review of terminated benefits case. In a quiet moment away from the cameras, Judge Carmichael seized his chance for the conversation he'd waited 20 years to have. You carried me 2 miles with shrapnel in your leg, he said softly. The medics told me you refused treatment until they stabilized me. Walter shrugged, humble as ever. You were worse off than me. You said something to me that day when I was fading in and out. Just keep breathing, kid. Your story isn't over. Those words kept me alive, kept me fighting. I became a judge to serve, like you. Can you feel the gratitude in his voice? Walter gazed at the judge, seeing not the robed authority, but the scared young medic from his memories. I'm glad something good came from that day, he murmured. Not just something good, Carmichael insisted. Everything good in my life. My career, my family, my chance to make a difference. It's all because you didn't leave me behind. For the first time in years, Walter's face broke into a genuine smile, his eyes sparkling with life. No man left behind. That was never just a saying for me. Oh, how that motto defined him. 3 days later, Walter stood in the judge's chambers, transformed in a crisp new suit, his military decorations gleaming on his chest, the Bronze Star, Purple Heart, and other ribbons proclaiming his heroic service. A VA representative presented his back benefits and a settlement for the administrative error. As cameras clicked, Walter spoke publicly for the first time, his voice steady. I don't want pity. I just hope those who come after won't be forgotten like I was. His words echoed. Could they spark real change? The story snowballed from a local tale to a national reckoning on how America treats its veterans. Lawmakers cited Walter's case, pushing bills to reform the benefits system. The iconic photo of him carrying an Afghan child resurfaced, now paired with images of him homeless on Brooklyn streets. A stark contrast that demanded answers about national priorities.
Walter Grady, invisible for 15 years, was now unforgettable. Can you believe the shit? 6 months later, Walter settled into Veterans Village, a supportive housing community in Brooklyn. His small apartment, his first true home since Margaret's death, held few possessions, but boasted a wall of cherished photos, Margaret radiant on their wedding day, his Iraq unit in their prime, and a new shot with Judge Carmichael at a veterans ceremony. Walter shunned most interview requests, but embraced speaking at local schools about military service and the struggles veterans face. His quiet dignity and honesty struck a chord, especially with troubled teens who found in him no judgment, only raw stories of heroism and hardship. Can you see the impact he made? Each afternoon, Walter sat on a Prospect Park bench, watching children play, sometimes the very bench where he'd once huddled against brutal weather. Outside the courthouse, a bronze plaque was unveiled. Justice is remembering those who were once forgotten. Beside it, a relief sculpture captured Walter carrying the wounded medic who'd become Judge Carmichael, the American flag waving proudly. At the dedication, the mayor announced the Grady Initiative, an annual fund for legal aid to homeless veterans. How fit. A 10-year-old boy, who'd often seen Walter collecting bottles, wrote a school essay. Not everyone in torn clothes is bad. Some people wear memories instead. It won a citywide contest and was read at a city council meeting on homelessness policy. Can you imagine Walter forged a bond with Judge Carmichael, joining his family for Sunday dinners. One evening, the judge's son asked, "Were you angry about being homeless so long?" Walter paused, thoughtful. "I don't need pity," he said. "I just hope those who come after remember those who came before." On Veterans Day, Walter stood at Fort Hamilton in his dress uniform, the first time in decades facing a crowd. His brief words rang out, "I once protected this country, now it's protected me back. Kindness is never too late. It just needs someone patient enough to wait." As he stepped down, young recruits and aging veterans rose in silent salute. Walter returned the gesture, his eyes clear, no longer cast down but fixed on the future. Oh, what a moment. Justice may linger, but it's never lost. "Your Honor," the prosecutor had said coldly. The defendant stole a loaf of bread. The man bowed his head. "I just needed strength to live one more day." The courtroom laughed, but the judge didn't. He'd heard the man's name. Who was he? Why did tears well in the judge's eyes?